الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
اللهم اجعل هذا الصباح صباح خير، لا يضيق لنا فيه صدر ولا يخيب لنا فيه أمر، واجعل لنا بكل خطوة توفيق وتيسير وأجر.
The United States and Somaliland are two countries which have a lot more in common than you might think. You might think that Somaliland and the United States have nothing in common, but I am here today to tell you that they have tons of things in common. But this is a Mr. Beat style comparison video, so I guess I better at least quickly cover the differences. The United States is an enormous country of over 3.7 million square miles, spanning the entire North American continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Somaliland is a small to medium-sized country, covering 68,000 square miles, and is located in what is known as the Horn of Africa. It borders the Indian Ocean in what is called the Gulf of Aden. The United States is one of the richest countries in the world, with a per capita gross domestic product of $76,027 per year. Somaliland is considered a low-income country with a per capita gross domestic product of $697 per year. That is low by international standards, but higher than the same figure for Somalia and not too far behind several other countries in the region. The United States is a very powerful country diplomatically. It is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, the lead country in the NATO military alliance, and has full diplomatic relations with almost every country in the world. Somaliland, meanwhile, is an unrecognized country. It's a real country. It's really not part of Somalia in any meaningful way. Its government is independent, fully democratic, and stable. But Somaliland is not a member of the United Nations and, importantly, is not recognized by any UN member. So these are some pretty big differences, and to be honest, there are several more. But I'm about to rattle off a long list of similarities, which I think might surprise you. Let's start with history. Both the United States and Somaliland are former British colonies. The US was originally 13 different British colonies who gained their independence in 1776. The UK granted independence to its former colony, the British Protectorate of Somaliland, on the 26th of June 1960. 5 days later, on the 1st of July, Somaliland united with the Italian-administered Trust Territory of Somalia to form the Somali Republic. But we'll get back to that. Both the United States and Somaliland have founding fathers who gathered together to debate the country's future before signing declarations of independence. For the United States, this gathering was called the Second Continental Congress, which met starting in 1775, primarily in Philadelphia, in the building now known as Independence Hall. On the 4th of July, 1776, that group signed the Declaration of Independence of the United States from Great Britain. For Somaliland, its founding fathers met for several weeks in 1991 in the town of Barao. The Somali Republic, which British Somaliland had joined in 1960, and which, by the way, had since renamed itself the Somali Democratic Republic in 1969, was in a very bad state by then. A dictator named Siad Barre had been running the country for decades, and in the few years leading up to this, Barre launched genocidal attacks against an ethnic group which makes up the majority of the population in Somaliland. Things were bad all over the country though, and in 1991, the government of the Somali Democratic Republic, based in the south in the capital city of Mogadishu, collapsed into civil war. With no government left to protect them, the elders living in the territory, which had, for 5 days in 1960, been an independent Somaliland, gathered together in Barao and decided to reassert their sovereignty, signing this Declaration of Independence. The US and Somaliland both have innovative national constitutions. The United States ratified its constitution in 1789 and was the first constitution anywhere in the world to successfully establish a truly republican form of government. The Somaliland Constitution was ratified following a national referendum held in 2001. 99% of the population took part, and 97% supported the new constitution. This new constitution has been a huge success, as just like in America, the Constitution really matters in Somaliland. One key innovation to prevent political parties from dividing along the many ethnic groups in Somaliland, as happens in a lot of countries, Somaliland's constitution only allows 3 political parties to compete at the national level at any one time. Both the US and Somaliland have established democracies which have set an example for other countries. The US was arguably one of the first democracies anywhere in the world and has been holding successful democratic elections for over 200 years. Somaliland, meanwhile, since ratifying its constitution in 2001, has held 7 nationwide elections. All of these were one-person, one-vote elections in which multiple political parties competed against each other and have led to multiple peaceful transitions of power. Now that last part is a big deal. Peaceful transitions of power are relatively rare in much of the world, and Somaliland's record on this count is unmatched by any other country in Africa. Both the United States and Somaliland have 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Leading the executive branch in the US is 46th President Joe Biden, who was elected in 2020, and leading the Somaliland executive branch is 5th President Musa Bihi Abdi, who was elected in 2017. Both the United States and Somaliland have bicameral legislatures. The United States Congress is split into the House of Representatives and the Senate, while Somaliland's parliament also has a House of Representatives and a House of Elders, also known by its Somali name, the Gurti. Currently, the House of Elders is not elected and is instead made up of traditional clan leaders. Switching to elected membership for the House of Elders is something that may happen soon, however. Both the United States and Somaliland have histories of divided government. In the US, the presidency and Congress are both currently controlled by the Democrats, but that's something that's not always the case. There is often Republicans in the presidency and Democrats controlling Congress, or vice versa. In Somaliland, President Musa is from the Kulmiya party, but in the 2021 parliamentary elections, the Wadani party won most of the seats in Somaliland's House of Representatives. Now, speaking of political parties, both countries are multi-party democracies, but there are some significant differences. For the past 150 years, the US has almost exclusively elected leaders from one of 2 parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Other parties are allowed to exist, but tradition and a lot of state and local laws effectively make it impossible for new parties to emerge on the national level. And don't even get me started about this one. In Somaliland, in an effort to prevent political parties from being based on the many ethnic clan and sub-clan divisions in the region, only 3 parties are allowed to compete in presidential and parliamentary elections. These parties are chosen from the top 3 performers in local elections. Eventually, if new parties emerge and make it to the top 3 at the local level, they are meant to take their place at the national level. This is actually a live issue at the moment and is causing some controversy, so I'm not going to talk about it more now, but I may cover it in another video. So that's a lot about politics that the US and Somaliland have in common. Let's talk about some similarities in other areas. Diplomatically, the US and Somaliland are very different, and as I mentioned earlier, no other country currently recognizes Somaliland. But both the US and Somaliland are keen allies of Taiwan. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi famously visited Taiwan recently to show her support for the mostly unrecognized country, which claims to govern all of China but doesn't really. Like the US and Taiwan, Somaliland and Taiwan also have very cordial relations and recently agreed to very strong diplomatic and commercial ties. After all, both Somaliland and Taiwan are stable democratic countries which are not recognized by most countries in the world. Come to think of it, maybe I should have made a video comparing Somaliland to Taiwan. Oh well, too late for that. The US and Somaliland are both very business-friendly countries. Despite a lack of formal recognition, Somaliland has successfully attracted substantial investment from the United Arab Emirates, which has funded an enormous new port at Berbera, and Taiwan, of course, is investing in oil production and several other sectors. And the welcome mat is generally open for businesses that want to invest in Somaliland. Just get in touch if you're interested. Neither the US or Somaliland rely on international aid. For the US, this is because it is one of the richest countries in the world, so it doesn't need aid. For Somaliland, which really could use the aid, the reason it doesn't get it is because of its lack of recognition. And this is a problem. It's been known to happen that governments will send money to the Somalian government in Mogadishu, which is widely recognized, and ask for that money to be sent to Somaliland, but it never quite gets there. The economies of the US and Somaliland are very different, but there's one sector that they are both huge players in: livestock. In the US, where beef production is a huge industry, there are currently 93.6 million head of cattle. That's a lot of cows. In Somaliland, there are only about 400,000 head of cattle, but there are an estimated 8.4 million goats, 8.75 million sheep, and 1.69 million camels. Yes, both camel milk and camel meat are both huge in Somaliland, and if you don't believe me, just ask someone from there. The livestock sector is actually really critical to Somaliland's economy at the moment. It employs 70% of the population and makes up 85% of exports, and it is an especially important source of meat for feeding the 2.5 million pilgrims who visit Saudi Arabia every year for the Hajj festival. So if you go on the Hajj and you're given a meal which includes goat's meat, there's a really good chance that that meat came from Somaliland. And lastly, both the United States and Somaliland have really similar attitudes when it comes to patriotism. As an American living in Europe, I'm very aware of how odd American patriotism can seem to people in this part of the world. We Americans don't just love our country, we seem to want to tell everyone how much we love our country. We're also really keen to discuss the ideals which make America what it is, even when we fall short of those ideals. And the people of Somaliland, in my opinion, have a very similar attitude. Somaliland only exists because the people who live there believe in what it stands for: peace, democracy, and the rule of law. And if you ask anyone from Somaliland to tell you why they're proud of their country, you better be prepared for a pretty long conversation, because usually they have a lot to tell you. And to be honest, they have a lot to be proud of. So in this respect especially, the people of the United States and the people of Somaliland have a lot in common. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there. If you're interested in learning more about Somaliland, I've made 5 previous videos. They're pretty easy to find on my channel, so just go and have a look. And if you're visiting from Mr. Beat's channel, hello, welcome. I make lots of videos about interesting political, historical, and geographical situations from around the world. They're not all about Somaliland, although obviously it's a special subject to me. So I'd love it if you had a look around the channel and maybe stuck around. And I'll see you guys in the next video.